All right. Well, welcome. We are so glad to have everybody with us tonight for this very, very exciting event. The Los Angeles Conservancy is partnering with the 50th Chicano Moratorium Committee to host this event. It's part of our 70s Turn 50 initiative, which aims to celebrate and recognize events from the 1970s, historic spaces and places, and the Chicano Moratorium is certainly one of those. I'm Sarah Lan, I'm the Director of Education, and you won't see me again for the rest of the evening once I turn my video off, but I will come in again at the end of tonight's event to help answer any questions that you might have. And just a couple of quick housekeeping issues before we get started. You'll notice that you don't have access to your microphones or your video cameras, but you still can communicate with us. You can use the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions that might come up as our event unfolds, and we'll be getting to those towards the end of the event. You can also use the chat box if you have a question specifically for an LA Conservancy staff member or some issue that you want to have addressed. I want to kick things off. Before we move into the panel conversation portion of the evening, we'll have two brief presentations to give you a little bit of context around the Chicano Moratorium and why this is so significant looking back 50 years after the event. Our own LA Conservancy Neighborhood Outreach Coordinator, Rosalind Segarra, will be speaking a bit about the Conservancy's involvement in the Chicano Moratorium designation and what's happening right now with that particular historic space. And we'll also hear from Belinda Faustinos, who will be moderating our panel. I am so pleased to have Belinda with us. She is the Executive Director of Nature for All. Prior to this position, she served as the Executive Officer of the Rivers and Mountains Conservancy and as Deputy Director of the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. As a member of the National Park Service Advisory Board, she co-chaired the American Latino Heritage Experts Panel and the Urban Committee. In late 2018, she joined the inaugural launch of the Parks California Board of Directors. She also serves on two local advisory committees as a Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors appointee and on the Board of Latinos Lead and Friends of Robert Redford Conservancy. Thank you so much for being with us, Belinda.
Thank you for having me tonight. I am so honored to be here and to be moderating this panel. I have to thank the LA Conservancy for hosting this event, which is very near and dear to my heart. I was a part of the Chicano Moratorium. I participated as a college student. I was a sophomore at Pitzer and attended the event with my sister. And it shaped and formed a lot of what I've done in my life, in my career. I think as a real student of social justice and equity, that was a formative part of my life. So I'm just deeply honored that the LA Conservancy has been taking this up, and honored to be here with Rosalio and Gloria, who are just, my heroes in terms of the civil rights movement and all that it involves in terms of Latino heritage. So I just did want to give everybody a little bit of context in terms of, what I see as the evolution of this movement to really recognize Latino sites and the heritage that we have left our nation as a people of this nation who I think many times, don't see themselves in that history. We don't see ourselves in, what we learn in school and what we see cherished across the nation. I have been fortunate to be able to travel a lot, in particular when I was on the Park Service Board, to look at wonderful historic places in this nation. And it seems like, kind of everything stops on the East Coast, it doesn't come west very much. And in particular for people of color, we just, have not seen ourselves in that space. So when I joined the National Park Service Board, I joined it as an appointee of Ken Salazar at the time, who was just a phenomenal leader. And not long into that administration, he really came to the National Park Service Board and said, hey, we have to start doing things differently. I want to see a different paradigm so that Latinos can be recognized for the rich contributions that they've made to the history of the United States. And he was just such a tremendous leader. I have so much respect for him. as a longtime government employee, when someone, at a management level says, oh, we're going to do this, you just don't know how much oomph there is behind it. And he was just amazing in terms of supporting this effort. Obviously, the Park Service themselves, really embraced this issue. We had some great leadership that saw this as being not only important for Latinos, but all people of color across the nation that did not have this kind of recognition, and that this could actually become a template for other designations that needed to happen to recognize other people within the U.S. that had never been recognized. And I am going to attempt to move my slide now, which is, that's interesting. We didn't test that out. Seems to be stuck for me.
Oh, your screen, Belinda, sharing your screen?
Yeah, you know what, it's back up, right?
Oh, yes, okay. Oh,
okay.
You know what, it's beginning, there you go.
It's beginning, okay. So sorry, what I'm having trouble with is actually moving the slides. So maybe I don't really need the slides in order to be able to talk about this. What was amazing to me is that Secretary Salazar, appointed a panel of 9 individuals, and then Luis Hoyos, who was at the time chair of the National Historic Landmarks Committee, and I co-chaired this group to really look at how we could put together the framework for this effort. And there was a weekend in San Antonio when we all got together, and there were, just really disciplined in terms of describing how they wanted to put together this template for how we could recognize Latino history across the nation, agreements that were phenomenal right from the get-go about, how to approach it. And then we move forward, starting to get to work. And within 18 months of that first meeting, we were able to get a document pulled together that really serves as a template for how Latino heritage can be recognized at the state and local level, and of course at the national level, where we want to see more designations happen. So I think that it's really important to recognize that effort, and the fact that actually recognized not only the Chicano Moratorium, but the designation of the first national monument for 40 acres at the Señora de la Reina de oh gosh, I forget the last part of it. But anyway, it was that recognition for Cesar Chavez that is so critically important. And, the fact that we had President Obama there for that event is, just particularly amazing, and something that I think that we need to recognize. So that context and that work was very meaningful. And what I'm extraordinarily proud of is the fact that as a result of that, we were able to get the Los Angeles Conservancy to actually take up the opportunity to really look at the Chicano Moratorium as a site that deserved recognition and a complex of opportunities that really had to be explored. So I was particularly pleased with Rosalio and him being really, the person that was so involved in, getting that off the ground, that we're able to have him on the panel here today to talk about that event and how important it is to Latino history. And Gloria, of course, that just had an amazing record in that effort as well. And actually, I don't see her on the screen, but I'm assuming that she is on board and can speak. What we'd like to do is actually start off the panel by having each person, Rosalio and Gloria, invited to share how they were involved in the Chicano Moratorium, introduce themselves and their background, and how what they did was instrumental to the moratorium actually happening. So Gloria, would you like to kick us off?
Actually, sorry, Belinda, before you begin, and Gloria, I just want to introduce Rosalind to talk us a little bit through the moratorium itself, and then move on to them, if that's all right.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Sarah.
Oh, of course.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rosalind Segarra, and I'm with the Los Angeles Conservancy, and I'm excited to be joining you today to talk about the National Register nomination of the Chicano Moratorium in Los Angeles. This nomination project is 5 years in the making. It highlights the power of ordinary places to tell extraordinary stories. It brings together years of scholarship and community knowledge. This project lifts up an important LA story and a national story. It also breaks new ground in expanding how we use the existing frameworks that Belinda has mentioned for listing important yet underrepresented places to the National Register. The project is comprised of 4 main parts, and I'm going to focus mostly on the nominations, but I want to mention what those 4 components of this project have been. The first is an amendment to our statewide historic context around Latinos in the 20th century. So now it will include a section on the Chicano Moratorium in Los Angeles. And then we have 3 National Register nominations that feature various sites, objects, and structures and buildings associated with the Chicano Moratorium in Los Angeles. So I'm going to go through that a little bit. So we have nominated the first Chicano Moratorium March, which happened on December 29, 1969. The success of this march garnered public support and attention for the Chicano Movement and subsequent Chicano Moratorium marches. So here we have a map of the route. The march began at 5 Points Memorial in the neighborhood of Boyle Heights in Los Angeles and continued south on Indiana Street and east along Mission Street. The 1.1 mile route follows flat residential streets in the neighborhood of low-rise, predominantly single-family homes. The route terminated at Obregon Park in unincorporated East L.A., where a final rally of the march took place. The second nomination that we submitted is Brown Beret Headquarters Building, located on 4th and Mott Street in the Boyle Heights neighborhood of Los Angeles. The Brown Berets' mission was to mobilize Chicanos not just against the war, but against social injustices they faced at home. Members of the Brown Beret were instrumental in the formation of the Chicano Moratorium Committee in December 1969. And though the Brown Berets met in several locations during the late 60s and the early 70s, this location, across Roosevelt High School, was conveniently located for nearby student members and large enough for the Brown Berets to practice marches. So lastly, we come to the third nomination. This is the National Chicano Moratorium March of August 29, 1970, which we're commemorating today and later this month. This nomination includes several contributing buildings and sites in unincorporated East L.A. The march began at East 3rd Street in front of the East L.A. Civic Center and progressed east on Beverly, south on Atlantic, west on Whittier, and ended at Laguna Park, which is now called Salazar Park. The 3.26 mile route follows a level street path characterized by mostly low-rise commercial buildings from the 1920s and to the 1960s. The image on the left shows the approximate location of the start of the march, and on the right is a view from Atlantic Boulevard. Since the march in 1970, there have been no major changes to the street pattern followed by the marchers. While signage and storefronts may have changed since 1970, low-rise commercial buildings continue to typify the streets. So now I want to turn to a couple of contributing buildings that the nomination features. Here we have pictured a building on Whittier Boulevard near Ciela Avenue. It's a single-story contributing commercial building. This building housed El Barrio Free Clinic. Now it's Mission Furniture. The clinic was established by the Brown Berets in 1969 and led by the female members of the organization. It was the first free clinic in East LA and represented the community service mission of the Brown Berets. Through the free clinic, the Brown Berets sought to improve the lives of the Chicano community by providing access to healthcare, education, and resources that could offer opportunities for economic growth and political empowerment. Many early moratorium committee meetings took place at a Barrio Free Clinic. Another important contributing building to the nomination is a building that houses Silver Dollar Cafe. This is where prominent journalist Ruben Salazar, who was covering the march for the LA Times and the Spanish language television station Chicanx, died. Salazar and his colleagues retreated to the Silver Dollar Cafe a few hours after covering the day's events. Shortly after, patrol cars stopped in front of the bar and several officers approached the door. Los Angeles County Sheriff Deputies Thomas Wilson fired 2 tear gas projectiles into the bar, and one of them struck Salazar in the head, instantly killing him. The violent outcome of the August 1970 march convinced many Chicano activists and community members to focus on the unique struggles of the Chicano community, and it was a milestone for organizing the Chicano community around struggles for equity. As of last Friday, the Chicano Moratorium and Los Angeles nominations have been recommended for listing to the National Register of Historic Places by the State Historical Resources Commission. The nominations will now go to the National Park Service for final approval. We're very much looking forward to the listing of these nominations and finding ways we can continue to share this important LA County story with the public. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end, but I'm so happy to be here.
Great. Thank you so much, Rosalind. That was a fabulous presentation and a good road down memory lane in terms of these all two important events. So to get back to kicking off the panel, I just want to start by asking Gloria to please, share with us how she became involved with the Chicano Moratorium and what led up to this historic event on August 29th of 1970. And you can take yourself off mute, Gloria, please. Lower left. Looks like she's maybe having a little trouble there. Oh, there you go.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. I worked with the Los Angeles County group that put this together. It wasn't a county agency, but an agency of the county, is my understanding. And I've had a lot of dealings with registering or trying to get registered sites, and it's very difficult. I mean, there's just a host of agencies you have to go through. So I thank the for all that they did. I'm very thankful for that. But I was involved once upon a time when I was a very young woman. I joined the Brown Berets, and when they were in Piranha Coffee House, they were the Young Chicanos for Community Action, becoming the Brown Berets. It took 3 meetings for me to finally say, okay, I'll join, because it was so different from anything I had heard, and was so in a self-determination mode, because they had very definite ideas that had to be done within in the East L.A. community. I lived in El Monte, but I used to go to East L.A. I actually was cruising Whittier Boulevard when I was told to go to the Piranha Coffee House, and it was a little strange, but I understood why, because when I did go in there, the sheriffs were outside shining a big spotlight in the windows. And if you've ever seen the restaurant that is there now, they have very unique windows. They're really arched and very big, very beautiful. It's a beautiful building. And so from there, I joined the Brown Berets and was very involved in a lot of things, including the free clinic. And that was David's vision. His vision was the Brown Berets, and you have to give him, acknowledgement for that. He had a vision. And so I'm glad I was part of it, because I learned a lot as a young person. I think I was 19. I went to the Poor People's Campaign. That was Martin Luther King's dream, to take poor people to Washington, D.C. I had never left the city I lived in. So it was all very exciting. Learned so much about people, about the diversity that exists in the world, the poverty. Going state by a day, each day going to a different state and seeing the poverty that existed was unbelievable. It still exists, especially on Native American reservations. Only 40% of the Navajo or Dene people have running water, electricity, or gas in this state. So poverty still exists. I joined the moratorium committee when I had left the Brown Berets. I was just ready to move on. And I did start another free clinic. I started working with Rosalio. This is where I met him, Ramses Noriega, Aludista, the poet, a lot of people. That office was always busy on the First Street. Was it First Street or Cesar Chavez Boulevard, I think? What is now Cesar Chavez Boulevard. And I was responsible for bringing, and I attended all the moratoriums that were held. And the one that wound up at Obregón Park, we took a list of all the soldiers that had died in Vietnam that were Latino Chicanos. And we read their names one by one, taking turns of reading the names. And it's painful to know how many young men were killed in Vietnam and not really acknowledged for it. You know, they came home in coffins, and now they don't do that. They don't let that be in your television in your front room. The war was shown, how violent it was in Vietnam, and they don't show that much details now. You have to read these things, but we were very aware there was a problem. There were disproportionate numbers of Chicano men dying in Vietnam. So that was our whole purpose behind Rosalio and his not being inducted into the military. He started a movement, and we did a lot of work, and we did a lot of traveling up and down the state. I had a little Volkswagen, and it was almost like a clown car. You know, how many Chicanos can I get in a car? They just smashed in the windows, and one by one would get out, and my tires would start lifting. But we go all over the state, wherever we were invited to go and talk about the Chicano Moratorium. We would ask people to set up meetings of neighborhood people and invite just their neighbors so we could talk to the grassroots. And we would take this reel-to-reel film of the moratorium in the rain. And we would ask them, put a sheet on your wall, on your driveway, whatever. And we, if they had food, that was fine. If not, we just talked and did this presentation. And that worked really well. And so back in the office for the moratorium, a lot of the Brown Beret women, ex-Brown Beret women, were there volunteering. I did all the housing. I contacted people in the Los Angeles area to take in somebody who was traveling from another state. And I had lists of names, just all these families. And that showed up in my, I donated all the archives that I had about the Chicano movement, and I donated that to Cal State L.A., and that list is there. So
that's fabulous.
That still exists. And, the day of the moratorium, when I see the banner, Chicano Moratorium, there's a truck behind that. That's my brother. And he was a Brown Beret also. And he's standing with his back towards the camera because everybody was looking at something. There must have been some announcements, of what we were going to do. And I sat on the back of that truck and went all the way down the street yelling. People had a megaphone. And when we got to the park, it was beautiful. A lot of people, a lot of pictures taken of, the ladies in the beauty salons came out and, for us. I have cousins who said they were there. They lived close by and they went. And it was just a beautiful event, a beautiful day, a very festive kind of atmosphere, okay? there was no militancy, there was no, you know, negative, no trouble starting. It was just beautiful. And all I remember is there were some young danzantes, young girls, like maybe 8 to 15, doing a beautiful dance. And I was aware that something was going on at the back of the park, and I got up on the stage and I looked. All I could see was like a wave coming towards us. And then it went back, and I could not figure what was going on. I could not tell from the front of that stage, looking back at the back of the park. And it's not a big park, but the second wave that came in, all hell broke loose. All I know is I got tear gassed. I did not know how I got tear gassed. I just know I was choking. I couldn't see. Somebody, you know, if you're still out there, thank you. Thank you so much. I don't remember who it was, but he had a wet t-shirt and he put it on my face and put me on a school bus that was trying to get out of there. And while I was on that school bus, you know, getting my sight back and my breath, some men came to the door. The driver was just panicked. He was just trying to get out of there. It was chaos. People just running and screaming, you know, and a whole group of men came to the door. The driver said, no, I can't open the door. I can't open the door. And it was Jorge Gonzalez and his entourage. And they forced the door open. They got on the bus. He didn't sit down. He stood there and he looked around out the window and said, no, we got to go out there. And so again, the bus driver, no, you can't go, you know, and he's trying to, this guy is just panicked. And they opened the doors again and they got out, and the history is he got arrested that day. And I went back to the office, and people were starting to pour in because they needed to know where they were going, what was going to happen. The fire department dropped off a young man with tubes around his leg. He had injured himself, and they put desks together, and that was his gurney. I mean, just chaos, and the phone's going crazy with news reporters calling. And I just went out front, and I looked towards Woodard Boulevard, and I could see all the smoke. You know, it was on fire. Okay, I wasn't out there. I didn't get stories till afterwards. And then historically, I have read documents and seen videos. And that was it for me. Wow. I went to Lynn Ward's funeral a couple of days later. He was from El Monte, here in El Monte. He was 15 years old. They had a Brown Beret unit out here, and he got killed. And I went to the funeral. And when I drove up, what I saw was detectives in the bushes taking pictures of the family at graveside. That sickened me. And I said, I am done. I went away for 40 years. And thank you, Rosalio, you brought me back. You wanted to use our pictures and my name. I said, sure, you can do that. You know, well, can you come to a meeting? Will you be a co-chair? No. I'm a different person now. No. I went away, and because of Rosalio being so insistent, and I love Rosalio, he's a dear brother, he made me realize that I needed to reclaim my history. I was denying my history and saying, you know, just didn't want anything to do with it because it was painful to see people die, to know that people died and that Ruben Salazar lost his life, a very important man to our community. You know, so I had to, you know, struggle through that. And I have, you know, had like a post-traumatic syndrome. And people found me and they started showing me videos, and I would sit here and cry. And it was very, very painful for me. And, but I've gotten over it. And I'm back. I'm here again.
And we're so lucky to have you, Gloria. Your story is so compelling, and you know, I think that your ability to share that with everyone here who's listening in is just so critically important. So thank you for sharing
You're welcome.
your story and how it related to the day of the moratorium. So Rosalio, I'd like to kick it over to you so that you can give us a little bit of your background. And you became the iconic image of the Chicano Moratorium. I think over the years, I've seen those images of the flyers, the event itself. So I just want to thank you for all that you did, and have you, tell us a little bit more of how you came to be a part of be the lead actually of the moratorium.
Well, I come from my family. My parents met in 1937 when a little town in Arizona near the border with New Mexico, about the middle of the state on the high plains, the school board was a majority Mexican Americans, and the people on the school board wanted Spanish-speaking teachers, which really meant they wanted Chicano or Mexican American teachers. And that's where they met. My dad had been a leader at forming a Mexican American Chicano Latino, that they weren't using those terms at that time, but got a group going at Arizona State University, and it was a teacher's college then. And so he had gotten a lot of people to be students there and be able to go work in this little town, St. John's, Arizona. He couldn't, because he was still a Mexican citizen, and Mexican citizens couldn't teach school in Arizona at that time. So he was a social worker, and he got the families to start sending more children to school, because school for Mexicans wasn't all that much fun. You were told your culture is no good, you can't speak your language. It was a Mormon town, and it had a little edge to it as well. But the schools had changed. And so he got more students to go to school from the surrounding rural areas. And so they had to go get other teachers. And one of those teachers turned out to be my mom after they met in a couple of years and were married. And so I come from a family of education. They had worked their way through college during the Depression. And the New Deal of those times, a little bit of a greater opening up of opportunities, could have been more, but it wasn't easy back then. But that gave them opportunities to move ahead. And so I had cousins, I had other aunts and uncles that were teachers. And so education was a little bit more natural for me. I had cousins older than me, and my brother, an older brother and sister that were in colleges. And so when I went to UCLA, I had an older brother and sister there. I had cousins in Stanford, Cal State Northridge, University of Arizona, different places. And so in some ways, the campus was more accessible. And I ended up getting into student activities. It was at the time of the free speech movement at Berkeley, and I got involved in student activism, trying to reform the university to be more humane. And I worked on different projects of that style of protest and activism. And then the poverty program had gotten some monies to have more students get scholarships to go to UCLA. So all of a sudden, there were more Mexican Americans coming from Boyle Heights, Lincoln Heights, East L.A., Wilmington, Silmar, and other areas in the valley where there were barrios. And my brother had graduated and was working in Lincoln Heights, and he would tell me, hey, we've got to be involved. There's a movement starting. And he eventually got me to go to some beginnings of what was called the United Mexican American Students, my older brother. And he took me to some peace demonstrations where there were good music, or UMAS meetings where there was mariachis. But I went to one of the first conference of people from all over Southern California, and I think And somebody said, hey, have you heard about Professor Guzman's study of the deaths of Chicanos in Vietnam? And it was roughly twice our numbers of casualties was twice the rate of the overall population. And after a while, we also studied that and thought, well, a lot of the rest included African Americans who had a high death rate too. So if you excluded the African Americans, it was more like 2.5 to 3 times, and the same one for them, if you did. But those two things hit my mind. Two things I was concerned with, because right out of high school, I turned 18. 2 months later, August of '64, the war starts. And then all of a sudden, I could be drafted and taken to a war. But as a college student, I could get a deferment and not have to go to the war. But it was always in the back of your mind, and I won't go into a whole lot of that, but it was there on your mind. I try to imagine going and fighting with buddies from high school, and I couldn't. I would think I'm in the jungle and doing this. And I said, but why should I go out and kill people? I don't feel that isn't me. And that kind of a war, 12,000 miles away, it didn't jive with my dreams or my thinking at night, late at night. But anyway, when I got both thinking about, and I learned more statistics of the poverty in our community because my parents had been educated. We coming up with, had a more middle class way of life. So I didn't go, when we came from Arizona, we lived in Fifth and Rowan, on the east side in the Maravilla projects, and then got a house around 1950 in Lincoln Heights. And then the freeway sent us to Highland Park, which was overwhelmingly white at that point in time in the mid-50s. So I didn't go to Garfield. I didn't go to Roosevelt. I didn't go to Lincoln. I didn't go to Belmont. I went to where there were more kids went to college, but in the rich classes, I was the only Mexican. I was the shortest, the darkest, and the youngest person.
And the handsomest.
So in a way, I was segregated away from the Chicanos in junior high and to a degree in high school. But so when finally I was in college and more Chicanos, and you could have a group, and here we were concerned about what was happening in the neighborhoods, and the walkouts happened, and then the war. And one of the things, not so much for me, but for others in UMass and that later became Mecha, you go on the campus and you see all these white guys. Okay, you go to the neighborhood and half the guys are missing. A lot of them are in the service in Vietnam, or they're in prison, or having a hard time getting jobs, being chased by police. Much different. And so the issue of the war, we had statistics, and then we saw practices that were like that. So I got involved in UMass and learned more about the discrimination, learned more about how institutions like UCLA at that time discriminated. So institutional discrimination. And so I began to look at the war like that. And so I ran for president. I got elected. When I did say I was against the war, right after, I was asked to sign an open letter to the new President Nixon with a couple of hundred other student presidents and editors of newspapers that we would not go to Vietnam if we were called. So I was on record. So how was I going to do it? I said, well, I'm not a barrio guy, but I'll challenge it in the courts, the discrimination. After I graduated, started working, helping start Chicano studies, Mexican American studies at the Claremont colleges, I did get drafted. And lo and behold, it was like Amanda. I was drafted for September 16th, 1969, Mexican independence. So I said, that's very symbolic. So my getting drafted on September 16th, having been a student body president, the first in a big university, national university, um, I decided to refuse, and it helped. And got a good friend who was a good organizer, had worked in the boycott, had done work in the Mexican American Political Association, helped me organize. I'm green as grass in terms of organizing and in the fund. And he did. And we began, we're going to help start, build the movement greater. We had a lot of leaders speaking out against the war. Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, Corky Gonzalez was a very dynamic leader from Denver, Colorado, and he was known from Texas to Chicago to Southern California. He was another Reyes Tijerina, very militant man fighting for the rights of the people in the highlands of New Mexico, who the government was taking their lands away in the forests. And others were speaking out. There was a woman journalist activist, Francisca Flores, had an independent progressive news thing. She, very early, 1965, Thanksgiving, groups organized to salute our soldiers in Vietnam. And she wrote, the best thing we can do for our soldiers in Vietnam is bring them home, and began criticizing the war. So anyway, I got involved in 69, but there were, when the Gulf of Tonkin in 1964, supposedly some torpedo boats of the North Vietnamese attacked U.S. destroyers out there near North Vietnam. Actually, it came out months and years later that never happened. But all the people voted, the Congress and the Senate, they voted to give the president powers to fight a war if they wanted to. One person voted against it at that time in Congress. His name was George Brown, and he represented East L.A. He represented parts of El Sereno and Highland Park. So he had a good part of the biggest population of Mexican Americans. He was close with the other representative, Ed Roybal, a historic person. Roybal was working closely with the President Johnson on things like the poverty program, bilingual education, and he was a little cautious the first year, but then he began criticizing, and by 1966, those two congressmen were voting against monies for the war in Vietnam. And I say that because our community didn't get up and say they were communists or say they were, they weren't defending our country, because we knew they were good people. So there was doubts about the war. And you know where the doubts were the strongest? The women, the mothers, the sisters, the wives, the girlfriends. They were the ones that said they don't want to see guys going off and getting killed, especially at twice the rate. But anyway, and so I thought, we do have a tradition supposedly of going to war and being willing to defend our countries, but I didn't see that as, I saw that's an unjust war. 500,000 people wasn't it at one time, plus bombers and aircraft carriers all around this poor country. So well, let me just say, many people could see that by 1969 and 1970. There was huge demonstrations of all kinds of people taking place, and more Mexicans each year. And one other special thing I'm going to talk about, I kind of introduced myself. I found out later there was something called Project 100,000, started by the Secretary of Defense. He used to be the head of Ford Motor Company. So about getting manpower, he was an expert. And so what he did is started what they were going to start off getting 100,000 people in the armed services that wouldn't have been qualified according to what the rules they had in 65. And so people didn't like, oh, that's not, they didn't want to talk about unqualified soldiers. But really, the standards were the same ones as were used in World War II and Korea. So they just opened it up to have more. But now they had the college deferments, and 50% of white males, youth, could get deferments. But only 4 or 5% of Mexican American, African Americans were going to college. So that meant we were the cannon fodder for that war. And if you look at the Chicano Moratorium banner, I think one of the peace persons responsible was one of the bus drivers, a Teamster. Name was Mauricio Terrazas, and he was one of the leaders in the community and a big peacenik, big union guy. And his son, Mauricio, who now works for, who's been an activist the rest of his life, like his father and mother were, you see he's holding the banner, like 14, he was 14, he tells me now. And there was an African-American kid, a little shorter, Mauricio's kind of a tall guy, but also carrying the banner of the moratorium, 3.5 miles or whatever it is. You guys can know how far it was. This was casualty meet. These young men, black and brown. And that's what marched. You see, there would be participation of Chicanos in other marches. Actually, there were moratoriums, was the name for a demonstration against the war on October 15th, 1969. Since no longer the president was Democrat, it was a Republican who actually was upping the intensity of the war when he said he was going to stop it. That they decided they were going to, or that had worked for the peace candidates, they decided they were going to organize what they called moratoriums on October 15th all across the country, not just big ones in New York or Washington, D.C. or San Francisco, but in Cincinnati, in Albuquerque, in Oakland, in other smaller towns all around the country. So a couple million people. And I would imagine maybe 20,000 Mexican Americans around the country. The next month, November 15th, was one of the kind of real big ones, both 500,000 in DC, 250,000 in San Francisco. I was invited to speak after I had refused induction to that one. Corky Gonzalez, our kind of a national voice, was invited to speak. Dolores Huerta was an MC, and all of that. And Abe Tapia, who was the leader of the Mexican American Political Association. We spoke, that was nice. That was my first real my first demonstration where I was a speaker that was for peace, and 200-some thousand. But then we went across the river to Oakland, where we were staying with the activists there. That was a peace person. And we looked at the TV, and they had Wayne Morris, a very progressive, almost like a Bernie Sanders type guy, speaking against the war. There was a Black Panther cussing people out for the racism. There was a Native American chief with a war bonnet talking about being against the war. So all those communities were seeing their participation in these huge demonstrations. But as a song by one of our famous Chicano singers, there's no Chicanos on TV. So we didn't know we were part of this whole big thing. So we have to go march in our own communities. We have to have Chicano moratoriums. And we have to go in the streets of our community like you see here. So that first demonstration going down Michigan Avenue, not on the major street. Gloria It was part of going with Reverend Hernandez to try to get permits to do Brooklyn, or Cesar Chavez now. But we went down Michigan, which was a residential area. But that was so symbolic, starting at where there was a statuette, big one, honoring our veterans and those that died and got medals of honor in World War II in Korea. We started there, and then we marched down these side streets to this park. But you know, you go down this slope to go into the park, and it filled up with 200, 300, 500, 1,000 people. We thought there was 1,500 to 2,000. And it was, I wish we had more. I was saying that was my first demonstration in East L.A. But when we came down that hill, we filled up that hill. And you know how it is when you have a venue where you're crowded, it looks bigger. And I felt so thrilled about that demonstration. And I think Gloria designed the leaflet. Then she was active with the Brown Berets, and later on she was active with the Moratorium Committee when we began organizing and decided to have a big demonstration in East L.A. to be a national Chicano moratorium, and that there would be moratoriums in Santa Barbara, San Jose, San Diego, all over. We had about 25 moratoriums between March of 1970 and August 29th, leading up to have one big national one in East Los Angeles. So when Gloria was talking about going over to these other towns, you know, they would go, the guys would be talking politics in the hall, and the women would be talking organization in the kitchen, you know, and that was unfortunately where that was at that time, but it was the women organizing. That's why when we had a 40th anniversary, and I said, we got to get Gloria to come with the other women. And we made a picture off the picture. If you can show the one of Gloria marching with the other Chicana women, that's me speaking. There it is. We have that image. We put it on our T-shirts. So I had to get her to come to our 40th anniversary meetings, because this is Gloria in the meeting, and two sisters. I keep on forgetting names. What are their names, Gloria? Come on.
We can
The
be
Reyes sisters. The Reyes sisters. They were part Yaqui. Gloria was Tanva. And the Gracie over here with the glasses. And anyway, they left the Brown Berets. The paramilitary wasn't the same thing they wanted. They came in mourning. Hilda has a cardiera. She's very famous for having the gun belt. But they had, they had crosses. And on the crosses were names of guys that died in Vietnam. Hilda has Richard Campos, a very famous song by Luis Valdez and his brother and others of the Teatro Campesino had written a song of Welcome Home, Richard Campos. He was a Chicano from the Bay Area, and they took his body to the wrong place. That's how much respect they had for what we died. I remember that song. It just gave you the sadness of how our people were considered that were fighting for this country.
Right.
So anyway.
Rosalio, I hate to interrupt you, but I'm a little mindful of time, and I want to make sure that we cover a few other issues, and maybe if you don't mind, we could go to Gloria to talk about, you know, what all this means for the future, you know, in this place and time when we're dealing with issues of, you know, systemic racism, still, you know, that we were dealing with 50 years ago. What do you see as the path forward, and how do designations like this really help us to try to move the needle and change the way that society you know, addresses these issues, and ensure that, you know, the civil rights issues that we all fought for back in the, you know, late 60s and 70s actually, you know, evolved to some significant change? Gloria, you're on mute still.
Okay.
Great.
Sorry about that. The history is what's important. It's an event that took place. It drew thousands, tens of thousands of people to come to East L.A. And when I talk to young people, I remind them, you know, all the social issues that we fought. Some people were beat up, some were jailed, many were jailed, some were killed. That they stand on the shoulders of giants. And we need to keep perpetuating this history, that we not let it be forgotten in any manner, shape, or form, because it's something to be proud of. And people worked very hard to put it together. You know, it was a lot of people that were involved. There was a lot of women involved. There was a lot of men that were involved. There was all ages involved. And, you know, a lot of people have passed, you know, so, you know, our generation, you know, we're getting to that time where, you know, we're kind of old now, you know, I'll say that. But, you know, we can't let people forget. Not only that, we need to honor those veterans that gave their life for this country and came back unrewarded. Okay, they still were in poverty. They still didn't have jobs. They couldn't get education. Education was not a consideration back in the 60s. Most every young people I meet now, they go to college. In my time, parents couldn't afford that. We couldn't afford it. And so, you know, we found other ways to go, you know, to learn. And, you know, eventually a lot of people did get education. But there was a time when we couldn't get that. We weren't entitled. We couldn't get health services. Veterans, I have veteran friends from Vietnam. They're pretty messed up. They have nerve conditions. They freak out every time a helicopter goes over. They think they're still at war. And so all those issues of mental health and health services and, you know, weren't available. Veterans, their pay wasn't that good. It was hard to get sometimes. And so we have to learn that these systems that be, how do we manipulate in there to get what is deserved and what we're entitled to, instead of just saying, it's a government, you know, that politician does not represent them. Make them represent you. You have voice. You have people who will support you. And if we do it as a group, unified and with solidarity, we'll win. We'll win. But if we're going to keep fighting with each other and tearing each other's up, and so this says this, and, you know, laugh at this one, we're not going to go anyplace. And we have to teach our children how to be in a community. Okay. If we are cursing and having bad, you know, behavior, our children learn that and they pick it up. If we stress, you need to go to college. If we stress, you need to get a good job. But to get a good job, you got to go to college. Or, you know, if you're lucky, you know, some job may just land in your lap. Like with the free clinic, I'm very proud that I ran into people years afterwards that said, had it not been for the free clinic, they wouldn't be a psychologist today. So learning in the free clinic how to give services through the health system, and we did it like a mass unit. I mean, it wasn't pretty. It wasn't tile and chrome. It was buildings. Who were the janitors? I was a janitor. We cleaned that building every day. All my volunteers, and the women were the forefront of those volunteers. You know, but the legacy of the clinic is people went on and into a career of health. And I'm proud of that because we set that example and they followed through. And so we need to continue to do those things, you know, just to keep a community empowered and unified. I think the most damage I see in the community is the fighting. And, you know, everybody thinks they have a way to do it instead of sitting down and talking about it. And I tell people, I don't care if you like me or not. I want you to work with me. Okay, let's do it together. Put everything aside. Let go of things that happened back in the 60s, 70s, the 80s, the 90s. Let it go because we have goals we have to meet. We have issues that we need to resolve. You know, we need to get those children out of cages. We need those children to go back to their parents or be united with families here. There are so many issues in our communities. The dreamers, they keep jerking around the dreamers. You know, they're always, this administration said we're going to fix it, we're going to, you know, make it better. It's not happening. He signs fake, what do they call when he passes a law? So we need to vote. I will end with that.
Amen.
All at the ballot box, okay? That's a commitment I want you to make to me and to Rosalio and everybody else who's still out there. We need to vote and we need to win. And we need to put aside, you know, the tearing down of some of these politicians because nobody's perfect. We all have flaws. We all make mistakes. And what we did in the past, maybe it was wrong, but let's look at today and let's go forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gloria. Well said. So, Rosalio, do you want to chime in here and talk a little bit about how you think this designation will actually help preserve the history and also allow us to move forward and have the social change happen when, you know, we can preserve it in a way that people can learn from it, in particular our younger generation. One of the things that we still need to do is get some interpretive information out there so that if the schools won't do it, you know, we can make sure that this legacy is not lost. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, I spend time doing people's history, talking about, wish we had time. I could talk about my parents' generation, the Mexican Americans, without them, without the Cesar Chavez or Bert Corona, or many of the people maybe the youth don't know, but who were there urging us to protest the war, urging us to vote, urging us to form organizations on the campus, in the neighborhood, and all of these things. And we did. And once we started doing things, Tony Rios of CSO and Caesar and Corky and all these people were sacrificing. And then we said, well, if you're going to organize, it takes dedication. You got to give your life, not so necessarily getting killed, but your life. People have to go out there and organize. And then others, they got to work, they got to do this or that, but they can support. I don't mean just be followers, and it's good to have followers, but it's better to have supporters who one weekend might be demonstrating for health care, the next one protesting police brutality. There were so many people. One of the women I read that was on our committee, Lillian Villegas, she's 91 years old. Her brother was Henry Levas, who was the one they attacked during the Zoot Suit times in the Sleepy Lagoon case. And they fought and were able to clear them of very racist political attacks during World War II, when many of their brothers and sisters were overseas, or these sisters were working in factories. She was there working with us. Others like workers that have been there in the Zoot Suits, fighting back against the sailors way back in the 40s. They were part of the Chicano Moratorium, that grassroots thing. And they taught us to do those kinds of things. So when we marched, it was like a fiesta rolling down the street. You could see there were people trying to start things, the monitors, the people, they weren't going for having violence. They were going for having a good time and enjoying and seeing their relatives from other states, and that hadn't seen each other in years. So it was a beautiful, beautiful time. And what we had put together from all over the country coming together, people thought Luis Carrillo, who is now a big attorney who wins against the police, in some of the documentaries, he said during the walkouts, gee, if we can do this year, what can we do next year? And then at the moratorium, he's in another documentary, you can see him, and he says, gee, what we did today, what we did in the walkouts, great. Now we did this a couple years later, what are we going to be able to do next? This was in people's minds. And then when they attacked us, Rudy Tovar said, he was, you know, a Mexican American generation. He said, I got so mad. You know, I thought we were going to have self-determination. We were moving so beautifully. And that attack made me so mad that I dedicated myself. I'm going to be part of this movement from the rest of my life. And I'm going to get unified. I don't want to, you know, if we have problems, we'll settle that out of the public and then come back together and be active. And that's what we did. And if you look at people that have helped build the labor movement, who have helped build the voting movement, like in Southwest Voters, for example, they tried to stop. Nixon kept from giving them nonprofit status to collect more money, but we've got those things going. It didn't happen all at once. You know, we had to learn, you know, we learn how to do things, and then they change the rules. So then we have to look, well, they're going to change the rules. Well, let's learn those rules and do even better. And so that was what we went through in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, getting more and more people elected. And now we're at a point where we can make a difference in changing the direction of our country. We have the votes. They tell me that something like every month, Latino youth that turn 18 that were born here can be registered to vote. 80,000 a month. So we have to get as many in the next couple of months to be able to vote. If it has to vote by mail, let's do it by mail. You know, we need to recognize the moratorium right now in August. But November 3rd, that's when we have to mobilize this year. That's kind of the moratorium for me. And the women, they're not holding back. They're not just put in the kitchen, they're out in the lead. And, you know, we have so many African American and Latinas in leadership, and it's growing. And many of the leaders we have, like Maria Elena Durazo, her first demonstration in her life was at a Chicano Moratorium in Fresno, because that's where she lived at that time. And like you, Belinda, you got started in some of those demonstrations about, hey, I could be on a board about the environment or about our history, and other people did that. And we were wanting to do so many things. One last story. I read about 8 years ago, somebody gave me this librarian's journal. And there was a story that in 1970, with all the unity starting developing, a Chicano Librarians Association in Los Angeles was formed. And they marched together August 29th. And when the sheriffs were coming in, swinging their things and hitting and having all that tear gas, you know, making you almost throw up, couldn't see. Well, they went to one of the members had at the nearest library. They went there to get away from the batons and the tear gas. Because when you move a little forward, have more resources, you can do better. And that's what that was the spirit of the moratorium.
Yeah, what an amazing story, Rosalio. I mean, all of this has just been terrific in terms of, you know, the continuum, you know, of what's happened leading up to the moratorium. And since then, I really appreciate, you know, the fact that you've persevered and you continue to try to educate all of us in terms of the meaning of the moratorium and how we can do better in the future. So I think that we want to go now to the audience just to see if there are any questions that the panelists can answer. And I'll just go here to the chat box, and if there are folks that really want to ask any of the panelist members a question at this point, it'd be great to hear from you.
Great, this is Sarah. Thank you so much, everyone. I just will start fielding questions as they come in. So as Belinda said to our audience, if anybody has a question for Rosalio, Belinda, or Gloria, please feel free to put it in the chat box. I'll just let you know there's a comment right now from Margaret Johnson. She says, thank you so much, Gloria, for sharing that story. That was when you were speaking earlier. Much respect and love to you. So there's fans out there. And thank you, Rosalio, too. She just threw that in. So Rosalio, you are not forgotten. And there's a question. And there's a question from Michelle to all the panelists. She says, it's great to see such strong representation among Latinx leaders in California. Are there voter registration efforts in Latinx communities in swing states? Getting political here, folks.
Yeah, yes, one of my friends, well, here in California, I think there's going to be a large amount that want to change the lack of real leadership and poor leadership in the White House and some in the Senate as well, which blocks so many things, that Arizona is one state that could change from how it voted a few years ago, both for the White House and for the Senate. So people were calling in from one of the unions, SCIU 721, one of the biggest service employees union, and urging people to come out and vote. Other groups that are progressive groups had people calling, encouraging people in Arizona that were on lists of being good voters to sign up to vote by mail. And I heard a report that something like 80% of the voters in the primaries in Arizona a week and a half ago, 87% voted by mail. So yes, there are ways of doing that. And because we have such a, now we've made progress, and the moratorium is part of the history of that has inspired people over the years to move forward. Because the last 50 years, I've been out there organizing, and people that marched in all different kinds of neighborhoods that were in UMass and Mecha, from the different campuses that marched together, that invited me and others to go speak, and they would pay me a few $100s, and that would go into the pot so we could buy bumper stickers, pay for mail, do all these other things. Back then, those people are all still around. We're getting a little old. It's kind of hard to go out and walk precincts about now, but we can get on the phone. We seniors, Chicanos, we can get on the phone and we can dial to Arizona, to Texas, to Pennsylvania, to Michigan, places where it's going to be close and we can make a difference. We also can be voting in our own neighborhoods and making sure to do that. But we have a big amount of progressive voters in California, so we can also be helping. Now, a lot of people come to California to get money. Well, I don't got much money, but I can get on the phone and call people. And I think that's something we need to do, to call into the battleground states as well, because we need a change. And
I want to add something to that, Rosalio.
What?
I want to add something to that, if you don't mind if I interrupt you.
Go ahead.
There are volunteers right now, grassroots volunteers, who are saying, if you don't have your ballot, and if you get it, we're supposed to receive it 29 days before the elections, but you can get them now. But she will personally pick them up and deliver them to the registrar's office. Okay, so there's volunteers, and if people want to do that kind of thing, it's much welcome, because we're having problems with our mail, and we don't know what's going to happen, before the elections with that mail. We're getting empty promises about that. So
great. We have a couple other comments and questions that are coming in. Susan Anderson writes, I attend James Lawson's monthly nonviolence workshops. One thing I have learned from the workshops and listening to this Zoom is the hard work and strategy that goes into having successful actions. Thank you for your story. I was a fellow marcher from the Teacher Corps. So that's a lovely comment. Thank you, Susan. And this one is from Arturo Rodriguez. He says, thank you for your mention of Corky Gonzalez. The story of the Crusade for Justice participation is important. Denver will honor Denver and Company protest on 8/29/20 in Denver. Corky would serve 40 days after retrial. Any thoughts?
Yes, we were attacked deliberately, and they targeted Ruben Salazar. They targeted Corky Gonzalez, the national leader. Myself, I had refused induction, but they did not come to indict me. And because they were afraid that might, because I was going around all over the place, that might add to my reach to people. But right after they attacked and that people were lost, people were arrested. I was working, Bert Corona was helping, calling every clinic. This man knew what to do. He'd been in so many strikes, calling every clinic and hospital. Who's come in? Who's been beat up? And people were calling where we were in this legal aid office and had many phones. They were calling, we lost somebody. One of the people that Gloria had helped find a house, but they lost one of their cars or one of their buses or other things. And we were busy doing those kind of things. So they messed with my draft trial. But I won't go in a whole lot, but I'm sure others. And they chose Corky, so it would be hard. We needed people like Corky because Bert Corona, one of the veterans, he was getting to work doing the things that needed to be done. And so that's why they went after him and kept him there. And they persecuted the crusade, and they persecuted the moratorium committee, and they came after leaders, and they killed Salazar. And that kind of, they had infiltrators, they had the FBI, they had, you should see the last day before the moratorium, Bert Corona in the story of his life told the historian in a book about Bert that Ruben came and said, I know, there's infiltrators. They're going to try to make an excuse for them to attack. It's so bad that things got out of hand in L.A. because this would be the first big minority demonstration against the war, and we need the minorities to fight this war. But you know what? We helped stop that war with others. They call it the Vietnam Syndrome, where the U.S. people all around turned against the war and wanted to end it. And it came down to the cannon fodder. First, that decided, we're not going to go out there and fight. And some of them even killed officers because who were saying, I'm going to shoot you if you don't go out and fight. But there were grenades, fragmentary grenades that killed a lot of officers that trying to force the troops that didn't want to. They called it fragmentary. That's one of the secrets. And even they were dropping all kinds of bombs all over Southeast Asia, not just Vietnam. And people protested, and all the bombs they dropped, unless they had troops on the ground in sufficient numbers, they couldn't fight that war. And so we played an important part in that part, denying them the cannon fodder to keep fighting that war. And that was something that was a gain for the human race. And that country now has the government that they want, and they're still operating. And I think that's one of the gains. There was a moral reason for fighting, for stopping the war against those people, and we were part of doing that. And that ennobled us too to go on the social justice path that so many of us have been working on this last half century. So Corky is a very important person to know. I think the most important work about Chicano history is his poem, I Am Joaquin, that talks about the contradictions and of our heritage over centuries and centuries, going back in 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years, all the different forms that we have changed and had different kinds of input into our history. So Corky Gonzalez, one of our great leaders.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Rosalio. We have a couple of follow-up questions on some of the other earlier ones. First, there's a comment from Marion. She says, folks should check out a new book called Set the Night on Fire, LA in the 60s by Mike Davis and John Wiener for an excellent history of the period. Thanks, Marion. That's great advice. I'll have to look at that. And there's a follow-up on the question about voting in swing states. Do you know of a national network for voter registration? The idea of a network to register Latinx voters in swing states. The idea is very important now.
No, I don't, but I'd like to find out, but it's difficult because like in California, you have to register in the county you vote in. Now, maybe they've been making it more easier and easier to vote. So we should find out. So, hey, tomorrow I'll get up on the phone and call my councilman and I'll say, hey, Gil, how do we get to find out how to register to vote, people to vote in Orange County or Coconino County, where I was born in Arizona, Flagstaff, or Maricopa County, where the most voters in Arizona live, and they got rid of that Sheriff Joe whatever Arpaio because they registered hundreds of thousands of new voters, mostly Latino, a couple of years ago, and they got rid of him. He ran again, and he got beat again just in the primary a week ago. So that we can find ways. We'll have to look. Okay, we'll have to find, and it's up to us, but the union movement is an important place to be looking at. Big unions like AFSCME or the SEIU, the whole hotel workers, they've lost a lot of jobs, but they certainly know about where to vote and how to vote. There's the County Federation of Labor, but we have a Secretary of State. Gee, I'm forgetting. He's from the Valley. I remember, I'm getting older, so names don't come that fast. But the Secretary of State office might be doing. They're doing a lot of reforms that will make it easier to vote. It's a little different, so it changes a little bit. So some people might get confused. But let's look those things up. It's up to us. If we don't do it, who's going to do it? Okay?
I think those are wonderful, wonderful words to end on. And there is, it looks like, an organization that Ricky submitted, Mi Gente, a Latino grassroots organization, launched the Sister State program to register Latino voters in key battleground states. And he included a link in the chat room if anyone's interested in finding out more. Thank you so much, Ricky. And thank you to all the people who have submitted questions. And I think pushed our panelists to really show their true colors as activists and agitators and all the wonderful A's that they really are. We're going to wrap up now. I want to say thank you so much to Rosalio, Gloria, and Belinda for being a part of this event. It's just been wonderful to have you all, and we're very excited to stay in touch as we work for this nomination to become official at the federal level. And everyone who's on this Zoom should stay tuned for more information about what we know will be a really exciting day when we get word of this nomination actually being seen.
Before we sign off, Sarah, I just want to give my thanks to the LA Conservancy and point out that it's only through efforts like this that we're going to be able to get these places designated. So kudos to the LA Conservancy for pushing this forward.
Yes.
We really appreciate your support and
Que
your advocacy on this behalf. So yes, que viva. Sí se puede.